Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
All right. You should be able to see this now. So I actually went over let me see where we are. There we are. Okay. How many times they mention in some way or another the construction of the tabernacle. I went over it carefully and I tried to outline the verses, the chapters and verses where these different times were enumerated, and I came up with 10 times. I had no idea it was that many times. But if you look on the YouTube site and for yesterday's lesson, you will see where I in the notes that you can see the various ways in which the tabernacle is mentioned. And and I also mentioned how it's being mentioned in these 10 different times. So here we are talking about where they were bringing, they were bringing this to Moses, right? Et Bigdei Hasrad. This is Rashi mentions what Bigdei Hasrad are beforehand, right? And Onkelos, it's very helpful. Levushe Shimusha. Okay, so he says Shimusha is to service, right? Utility. Jastrow translates Srad as leftover. But essentially what we're talking about here are tarps or things like that, l'sharet b'kodesh, to serve the sanctified objects, so that when they would travel around with them, they would have these cloths to cover the ark and cover the shulchan and cover the menorah. So they had these bigdei srad, the bigdei hakodesh, and the sanctified clothing. In other words, we're talking about the garb of the high priest and the priests, la'aharon hakohen, for Aaron the kohen, the priest, ve'et bigdei vanav lechahen, and the clothing, the garb for his sons to minister. Kachol asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe, just as God had commanded Moses, according to everything which God, the Lord had commanded Moses, Kain asu b'nei Yisrael. Thus did the children of Israel perform et kol ha'avodah, all the work, all the preparations of the Mizbeah, of the Mishkan. Vayar Moshe et kol hamelacha, and Moses looked out, he looked and he saw all the labor, v'hinei asuota, and behold, they had performed it. Ka'asher, just as tzivah Hashem, just as the Lord had commanded, Kain asu, thus they did. Vayvarech otam Moshe, and Moses blessed them. And there's just some very beautiful ideas going on here, right? Just the idea that we should devote ourselves to performing divine will, that's just it's not a small concept. It's a very significant concept. And in terms of having a life, expanding every moment of our life in some worthwhile way. And it doesn't limit us in a lot of ways, but it does at least limit us to doing things that are self-destructive or destructive of others and destructive of the world around us, and also to encourage us with the positive mitzvot, to do things that build up a person and build up the world, etc. So lovely Rashi here, Vayvarech otam Moshe. So Moses blessed them. Question, well, what? What blessing? Amar lahem, he said to them, Yehi ratzon, may it be God's will, Shetishre Shechina b'maaseh yedechem, that the divine presence should dwell amongst the work of your hands. And there's this beautiful psalm, Psalm 90, right? That's attributed to Moses, actually, in its superscription. At the end, the last line, it says, Vahinom Hashem Eloheinu, and may the pleasantness of the Lord our God, Aleinu, be upon us. Goes on to say, and may the work, I'm trying to think of exactly, may he establish the the work of our hands, right? You can do stuff, it doesn't mean it's going to last very long. But the fact that our work, the work of our hands, should be something that is worthy of endurance. V'hu echad, and that particular line from that psalm is echad miyud aleph mizmorim. It's one of 11 psalms shebat tefillah Moshe that are in. He refers here actually means, of course, in our prayers, but he's referring to the book of Psalms that is attributed to Moses. So starting with Psalm 90, going through Psalm 100, are, at least according to tradition, all attributed to Moses, and they are magnificent, magnificent psalms. Let's go on. By the way, let's see, Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat, the psalm, a song for the Sabbath day, is one of those psalms. It's Psalm 92, so it's also one that's attributed to Moses. And again, we can look at it past simply the attribution and say, what's the significance of that attribution? That in some ways, of course, that there is a deep, deep connection between these psalms and our connection to the divine. So, okay, that's maybe number 9. Okay, that was number 8. This is number 9. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, so now God is giving Moses instructions regarding the actual setting up of the sanctuary, of the Mishkan. Bayom HaChodesh HaRishon, on the day of the first month, Be'echad Lash Chodesh, on the first day of the month. So, on the first of Nisan, Takim et Mishkan Ohel Moed, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. Let's take a look if there's any. Right, so our next Rashi is Gimel, so one more verse. V'samta sham et aron haide. See, now he's delineating the various elements of the tabernacle. This is the 9th time we're going over this. And you shall place there in other words, once you've set up the tent of meeting and the other things, you shall place in the Mishkan, in the tent of meeting, Aron Ha'idut, the ark of the testimony. V'sachota al ha'aron, and you shall cover over the ark, et haparochet, the ark cover. So, although it's interesting because kaporet, notice the transposition of these words. I'm looking to see, because a parochet is more of a curtain. So I think what he's saying, it's not the ark cover, and I appreciate sort of being able to correct myself as, despite my preparations, to be able to correct what I think is an incorrect interpretation. He's saying that you should spread over the ark, not over literally, but basically between the ark, the chamber where the ark is, and the rest of the holy area, the parochet, the curtain. So let's take a look. Rashi, right? V'sakota al haron, right? And this is from the word sukkah, right? Sukkah, our tabernacle. And it's basically about the roof, right? And why? Lashon Hagana. It has the connotation of protection. Sheharei mechitza haita. And this, of course, confirms our interpretation. And he says, because it was a partition. This curtain was a partition between the holy area and the Holy of Holies. So that partition represents protection in a sense, right? So, going on a little bit. Veheveta et hashulchan, and you should then bring the table. This was that table with the showbread on it. V'arachta et ercho, and you should set up its arrangement. That's, remember, the 12 loaves that were placed on those 12 pans. Veheveta et hamenorah. So we now have the order in which the setup is. There's an order to it, right? And you should bring the lampstand, the candlestick, the haleta et neroteha, and you should, what it's basically saying is illumine its lamps, kindle its lamps. Let me mark the place here. So, and we'll stop here. And I will mark this.
It's a very short Rashi.
Okay, yeah, let's take a look at the Rashi. Thank you. Okay, va'arachta et erko, right? In other words, this is about the table, right? The showbread table. Shtei ma'arachot, so two arrangements, shelechem hapanim, of the showbread. So, yes. Okay, it's arrangements, those two columns of 6 apiece of the bread. So we will stop there. Right. Okay, and I would say in retrospect that this, even though it's a brief lesson, is in memory of my mother's Shulamit Wittenberg Miller's Yortzeit, which is today.